road back there. That alley is small, and it comes right along several buildings. And there's already 8 cars using the alley now. Put a duplex in, and that's 12, and that's if nothing else happens. That's a lot of traffic for that little alley. And I mean, it's small. I wish I could show you my phone.
That's all right, sir. And so I'm really confused on the watershed issue. I don't know that there's a watershed issue. Are you saying that folks have tried to go through the planning process and couldn't submit a plan that worked, or?
No, they worked. Like he had to, he couldn't build it the way he wanted to. It had to be up off the ground, only a certain size, and he could take it up so high, but he couldn't go out the way he wanted. Like I said, we have not tried to build anything back there, but.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any other questions for Mr. C?
Well, if you guys.
Thank you. Is there anybody else here to speak in favor or against this application? Seeing as though there's none, we'll call this meeting closed.
Yeah, I guess let the property owners again. The meeting's closed. You'll have an opportunity.
Come on up, sir. And your name?
My name is Mark Snyder. I'm the property
Address,
owner.
please, Mr. Snyder.
Excuse me.
Your address.
98066 Road E, Lipstick.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm the property owner, and you know, the duplex we're planning on building is similar to the ones that are there already. It'll have to be a little bit bigger just to conform to to size requirements now. But you know, as far as it's not a flood zone, there's no runoff problems there, I don't believe. You know, I think it's consistent with any property or with any of the buildings that are in that area anyways. It's not going to be a big 2-story duplex like some of them that are going at. It'll be a 1-story. And when we bought those up, the original 2 that are on there, they were pretty bad shape, and we came in, fixed them up, and I think everybody, you know, in the neighborhood would think it's in a lot better condition now than they were. So, and we would keep them that way. So I just, you know, I think we're improving the neighborhood. I guess that's all I need to say, or want to say.
Questions for Mr. Schneider? Thank you, sir. And with that, we'll call this meeting closed. I'd like to call this regular session of the Findlay City Council to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Greeno.
Here.
Mr. Haas.
Here.
Mr. Hellman.
Here.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Here.
Mr. Palmer.
Here.
Mr. Russell.
Here.
Mr. Schindeldecker. Mr. Slough.
Here.
Ms. Warnicki. Here. And Mr. Volkser.
Please, I entertain a motion for Councilman Volkser, Councilman Schindeldecker, and Council President Harrington. For their absence, they had informed us previously that they would not be able to make today's meeting. Mr. Slough.
So moved.
Thank you. A second. Mr. Greeno, all in favor of excusing Jeff, John, and Tom, please say aye.
Aye.
And they are excused. My name is Grant Russell. I am the President Pro Tem of City Council with President Harrington absent. I move from that side over to this side and get a view of my colleagues' faces instead of the back of their heads, but I will be running today's meeting. I still am a voting member of council, and but I'll just be doing double duty tonight. And with that, we will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. Mr. Slough, do we have any add-ons, replacements, or removals from the agenda?
Yes, sir, we do. We have a add-on letter from President Pro Tem Russell regarding an ad hoc committee assignment for designated outdoor refreshment area known as DORA. And that would be in the communication section, planning and zoning committee report with regard to the zoning map update. And for a first that I've ever seen in 20 plus years is a removal, and it's of ordinance number 2020-122, 7806 Street rezone legislation.
And if that was in the form of a motion, is there a second? Mr. Palmer. We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the add-ons and removals from the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the agenda is amended. We'll move on to proclamations. Acceptance for our October 6th, we'll do a minutes first. Acceptance to the October 6th, 2020 regular session of council minutes. Mr. Slough.
I would move to adopt the minutes of the October 6th minutes as circulated.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Comments. I will make a statement that there was one small change on page 3. Just some order of paragraphs got mixed up, and I asked Denise to change the order to make it be in the proper spot. It changed nothing of the actual content, and I asked her to make that change. So, Jim, if you would change your motion to not as, if you consider making your motion to with changes as requested instead of as circulated, that'd be appreciated.
In addition, I would move to approve the minutes as from the October 6th meeting and with the information that was presented by Councilman Russell.
You still good with that, Mr. For your second? Thank you. All in favor of accepting the minutes as changes explained, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, and they are accepted. Now we'll move on to proclamations. And we have a proclamation from Mayor Christina Mern of Findlay, Ohio. Whereas persons with disabilities have the same rights to live, learn, work, and play in their community. And whereas workplace welcoming of the talents of all people, including people with disabilities, are a critical part of our efforts to build an inclusive community and a strong economy. And whereas in this spirit, the City of Findlay, Ohio recognizes National Disability Employment Awareness Month this October to raise awareness about disability employment issues and celebrate the many and varied contributions of people with disabilities. And whereas the Hancock County Board of Developmental Disabilities promotes the inclusion of all persons with disabilities in the local workforce. Local employers have made a commitment to a diverse and inclusive workforce. And whereas activities during this month will reinforce the value and the talent people with disabilities add to our workplace and communities and affirm Findlay's commitment to an inclusive community. Now therefore I, Christina M. Mern, Mayor of the City of Findlay, Ohio, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2020 as Disability Employment Awareness Month in Findlay, Ohio, and call upon all employers, schools, and other community organizations throughout Findlay to observe this month with appropriate programs and activities and to advance its important message that people with disabilities are equal to the task throughout the year. Mayor Mern.
Thank you, Councilman Russell, for reading the proclamation into the record, and it's certainly my pleasure to recognize Disability Employment Awareness Month on behalf of the city and Findlay and recognize that individuals with varying disabilities can contribute to our community, and there are many doing so. Even in these crazy times, they are out giving back to their community, investing and finding livelihood for themselves, and using their unique talents to contribute to our community. And it's certainly a pleasure to be able to recognize them. And I believe Matthew is here with us this evening to receive the proclamation on behalf of the Hancock County Board of Developmental Disabilities. So let's recognize him. Thank you, Matthew, for coming. We're going to take a picture here. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Another round of applause for Matthew. And if I may just real quick give a shout out to the Findlay Hancock County Board of Developmental Disabilities and all the great work that they do. I know it's been a challenging time for them to contribute and continue to work with their individuals, but they are certainly a great organization that does a ton that goes unrecognized in our community, not only from making sure the individuals are supported and have social experiences, but also that they have work, the ability to learn, and the ability to socialize. And so we're very grateful for the work that you guys do. Thank you so much.
Oral communications, we have a presentation from Blanchard River Watershed Partnerships, Laura and Sandu.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Lauren Sandu. I am the Watershed Coordinator for the Blanchard River Watershed Partnership. I'm here on behalf of a request for a continuation of funding. So the Blanchard River Watershed Partnership is a 501c3 nonprofit based out of Findlay, which covers the 6-county area that's enclosed within the Blanchard River Watershed. We got our 501c3 status in 2006, and since then we've been able to secure over $11 million in grant funding, which has primarily gone to landowners in the area, farmers especially, to implement best management practices. So our overall goal is to improve the water quality in the Blanchard River watershed and to educate people that live within the watershed just about the watershed that they live in, different things that they can do to improve water quality. So we typically have an agreement with the city of Findlay in which we receive financial support from them on an annual basis. We've been receiving financial support since at least 2013, and I believe even before that. And it's really crucial for us to receive that support since we are entirely grant funded. At one point in time, we did receive support from the state of Ohio to support the watershed coordinator position, and that support stopped in 2017 across the state. So we are totally reliant on grant funding. We rely on memberships and donations from the public, and then we also rely on contributions from the city of Findlay and the villages that are within the watershed. So the village of Bluffton and the village of Ottawa mainly. So we have been fortunate in that we have still been able to accomplish quite a bit this year, even amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. And I have a list of accomplishments that I prepared for you all, going over the main accomplishments that we've achieved over the course of the last 2 years, so 2019 and then 2020 up through now. Our largest achievements would be the writing of the 9-element non-point source implementation strategic plans, which are NPSIS plans that we write for specific subunits of the watershed or sub-watersheds. We write those plans in partnership with the soil and water agencies, with the support of the city of Findlay, with the support of the villages within the watershed. And ultimately those plans get submitted to the EPA, where they will receive official approval. And what those plans do is they describe particular regions of the watershed. It gives a general land use description. It points out any impairments that that particular watershed may be experiencing. And then we can suggest potential projects that we would implement in the future. And once those NPSIS plans are approved by the EPA, it makes us more competitive when we do apply for federal funding. So to date, we have written and received full EPA approval for 8 NPSIS plans since 2017, which is really when that requirement came into place. So agencies and organizations all over the state are writing those plans, and we've been able to accomplish quite a bit. Our goal is to write at least 2 plans a year, and in 2020 we actually wrote and received approval for 3 NPSIS plans. So in order to write those plans, they take about 130 hours to write, and that time has to be funded. So in order for us to be able to keep writing those, we've got about 30 sub-watersheds in the Blanchard River watershed, and so every one of those sub-watersheds need to have a plan. So we've written 8 of those so far. So if we were to not continue to receive financial support from the city of Findlay, from the villages that are in the watershed partnership or within the Blanchard River watershed, the soil and water districts, the cities, the villages, they would kind of have to pick up the work that we've been doing in terms of writing those NPSIS plans. And then once we do get those plans approved, and we do pursue grants that fund the projects that are in those plans, we will then run those projects. So one such example, the Howard Run Blanchard River watershed received full approval from the EPA this year, the NPSIS plan that we wrote for that watershed. Because that plan received approval from the EPA, we were able to partner with the University of Findlay to pursue a project that would handle the parking lot runoff that the University of Findlay campus is experiencing into Howard Run, which runs right along several parking lots through the campus. So because we had that Howard Run plan approved, we were able to pursue funding under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which we actually just secured last week. And we did receive a $72,000 grant, which will allow us to install a wetland of sorts on the University of Findlay campus that will eventually be able to be used as a living laboratory for the students and the instructors that are there. So these are the types of projects that the NPSIS plans essentially allow us to implement. And beyond that, we obviously allow farmers to, or assist farmers with using things like cover crops, conservation tillage, and that all comes from the NPSIS plans as well. So we're doing work in the Lower Riley Creek watershed right now with farmers because of the NPSIS plan that we had written and received approval for in the Lower Riley Creek watershed. So the agreement that we typically have with the city of Findlay, we work to renew it every few years. 2020 is the last year that we were set to receive financial support from the city of Findlay on an annual basis. So we're just coming here to request that that financial support continue into 2021 and then into the future.
Questions for Lauren? Mayor? Or Mr. Greeno?
Yeah, I don't really have a question, but I want to kind of emphasize that I think this is a very important organization. Here in the city of Findlay, mainly we worry about the quantity of water that goes through Findlay. They're worried about the quality of the water on the days that it's not flooding, and they're worried about the septic tanks that are leaching into creeks and stuff around it. Keeping in mind that everything that goes in to the Blanchard River will eventually end up into Lake Erie also. And they were already having issues with Lake Erie with the algae blooms and stuff like that. So I very much support this organization for the things that they do and for the amount of things that they get done for the little amount of money that the city does give to them. So I just wanted to state that I'm fully behind the Blanchard Watershed Partnership.
Thank you.
And as Randy is the council rep to the Blanchard River Watershed Partnership, I was for a handful of years when I was first on council. Randy is correct. This is the little engine that works way above their weight, so to speak. They get more done with on less dollars. It is a wonderful investment for the city of Findlay. Paul, doesn't this go into our MS4, something with the state of Ohio?
It does help us with regard to communication points within that plan.
So there's other added benefit for the city of Findlay. There's one part on this, I just wanted to quick summary if you could. I hate to throw
Oh, that's okay.
one that you might not know on. Riverside Park Dam, what's with that? Where are we at that project? Because I noticed point 8, you had State Senator McCauley up here to take a look.
Right, yes. So we had gone to the State House in October to meet with Senator McCauley and Representative John Cross, and Senator McCauley then wanted to come out to Riverside Park himself to see the proposed project site. After he saw the site, he suggested that we submit an application to receive state funding, which would allow us to pursue the project, and then COVID hit. So we have not really moved with that at all this year. I think we're probably going to end up, I don't know if we resubmit our application for next year's state funding, but we're kind of waiting to hear from his office on that to see if we can start to pursue that hopefully in 2021.
And then the goal of that plan is to,
So the idea would be that we would modify the dam at Riverside Park so that the water flow would improve. We'd put a fish passage into the dam to allow fish movement up and downstream at that particular point in the river, because that has been an issue. And then the biggest issue is the buildup of sediment behind the dam. So there are 2 large sediment islands, one directly behind the dam and another one that's near the mouth of that reservoir area that's over by the boat rentals. And that is just causing problems ecologically, and there is a potential that it could alleviate some of the flooding issues a little bit if we were to remove that sediment. So that would be the goal of that project overall.
thank you, Mayor Moore.
You in essence touched on it. I was just going to reiterate the Riverside project because I think that's a huge one. That's, you know, a previous reservoir that had about 10 feet of depth, and right now we probably have a foot,
Yeah,
maybe
it's
2.
like 2 or 3. Yeah.
It's very, so that is a huge project, and I just wanted to also point out the fact that the annual contribution is just $5,000. So Lauren, God bless her, writes these huge long reports that I get the pleasure of reading, and they do a ton of work, but the grant dollars that they're bringing into our community, the overall aesthetic, water quality benefits that they are providing is well beyond the $5,000. So I would highly encourage that we continue this contribution. So thanks for being here, Lauren.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have no petitions, written communications. We have the add-on.
A letter from President Pro Tem Russell regarding the ad hoc committee assignment for the designated outdoor refreshment area.
Anybody want to entertain a motion to accept the written communication? Mr. Palmer,
Yes, I move to accept the letter from Councilman Russell.
second Mr. Carino. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And the letter is accepted. Reports of municipal officers and municipal departments.
Findlay Municipal Court Activities Report for September 2020.
Questions or comments? Report be filed.
Board of Zoning Appeals minutes for August 13th, 2020 and September 10th, 2020.
Questions or comments? Minutes be filed.
A letter from City Auditor Jim Stashak regarding RLF administration.
Questions or comments? Letter be filed.
Letter from Auditor Stashak regarding summary financial reports as of September 30th, 2020.
Questions or comments? Reports be filed.
Financial summary from Mayor Mern.
Questions or comments? Reports be filed.
Precipitation and reservoir levels report for third quarter of July through September 2020.
Questions or comments? Reports be filed.
Letter from City Auditor Jim Stashak regarding amendments to the city's salary ordinance.
Questions or comments? Letter be filed.
Findlay Police Departmental Activities Report for September 2020.
Questions or comments? Report be filed.
Treasurer's Reconciliation Report for September 30th, 2020.
Questions or comments? Report be filed.
Letter from Hancock Regional Planning Commission Director Matt Cordonier regarding zoning map update.
Questions or comments? Letter be filed.
Findlay Fire Department Activities Report for September 2020.
Questions or comments? Report for file. Committee reports.
Planning and Zoning Committee, to whom was referred a request from Moselle and Evelyn Marie, I'm not sure if that's it, to rezone 786th Street from R1 large lot residential to R4 duplex triplex. We recommend to reestablish the non-conforming use as a duplex triplex.
Mr. Slab.
I would move for adoption of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Questions or comments? I will let the folks know this is a different one. So the applicants requested a rezone, and city planning and zoning recommended instead that we reestablish a non-conforming use, which is a duplex. There was a duplex on the property, was a duplex. It then sat vacant for a couple of years, and it lost, and it got converted to a single-family house. Even though all the infrastructure for a duplex existed, it sat unoccupied for a couple of years. It got marketed to the applicants as a duplex, but because it wasn't being treated as a duplex for a handful of years, it lost its ability to be a duplex in this zoning district. When the applicants received the card on the rezoning, which included their property, that clued them then to call Hancock Regional Planning, and that's what started their process to request a rezone. But in conversations and in investigations with Hancock Regional Planning, they came up with the thought that the better way was to reestablish the non-conforming use, mainly because for two reasons. It could be done less expensively for the applicants, it can be done quicker. A rezone requires 3 readings and then I think 45 or 90 days, whereas the non-conforming use can be reestablished if we accept this committee report. It's quite simple. So by the end of this meeting and the signature from the mayor, they can be legal. And then in addition, once the property gets rezoned under the standard or under the rezone or zoning map update, it would also be a legal property. And so I credit Hancock Regional Planning and Matt and his staff for actually not just pushing papers, but investigating and coming up with a good option for citizens who are trying to do the right thing. And so as a result of this, we had legislation, ordinance 2020-122, that called for the rezone of it, but that's really not necessary anymore, and that's why that ordinance is being removed. So this committee report gives them the ability to enjoy their property as a duplex, which is the way it was marketed to them and the understanding they had when it was purchased. And it also removes ordinance 2020-122 from the agenda. As a result of it, it would remove that from the agenda. So this is a case like I have never seen on planning and zoning. And with that, we have a motion and a second to accept the committee report. Any other questions or comments? All in favor of accepting the committee report, please say aye.
Aye.
And it is accepted.
Planning and Zoning Committee, to whom was referred a request from Brett Gies, landscape architect with RCM Architects, on behalf of Thomas Gensman, property owner of 314 West Sandusky Street, to reestablish a non-conforming use of the property as a duplex triplex. We recommend approval as requested.
I'll entertain a motion to accept the committee report. Mr. Hellman.
Move to accept the committee report.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Questions or comments? All in favor of accepting the committee report, please say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
I would like the record to reflect that I abstained from the vote.
Mr. Slough abstains.
Planning and Zoning Committee, to whom was referred a request to discuss the proposed zoning map updates. We recommend adoption of the new zoning map.
Entertain a motion to accept the committee report. Mr. Slough.
So moved.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Questions or comments? All in favor of accepting the committee report, please say aye.
Aye.
The committee report is accepted. Legislation.
Third reading for ordinance 2020-106, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and auditor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to execute all documents necessary to make the benefits of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters 457 Deferred Compensation Plan Roth 457 option available to all Findlay firefighters and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of ordinance 2020-106.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Questions, comments? Seeing those is none. All those in favor of passing ordinance 2020-106, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Mr. Slough,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2020-107, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and auditor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to execute all documents necessary to make the benefits of the Ohio Public Employees Deferred Compensation Program, Roth 457 option, available to all city of Findlay employees and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Greeno.
Yeah, I move for adoption of ordinance number 2020-107.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Questions or comments? Seeing though there is none, all in favor of adopting ordinance 2020-107, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Mr. Slough,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki,
Aye.
and Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2020-109, an ordinance authorizing the auditor to make payroll deductions for those employees who have elected to enroll in the health savings account plan and declared an emergency.
Mr. Hellman.
Yes, I'd move to adopt ordinance 2020-109.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Questions or comments? All in favor of adopting ordinance 2020-109, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Mr. Slough,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki,
Aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Did I already get Mr. Hellman? I
You
apologize.
did, but I'll vote again.
The ordinance is adopted.
Through a third reading for ordinance 2020-111, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Greeno.
I move for adoption of ordinance 2020-111.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Questions or comments? All in favor of adopting ordinance 2020-111, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Mr. Slough,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki,
Aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2020-113, an ordinance amending chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the city of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by rezoning the following described property referred to as 525 and 529 Davis Street rezone, which previously was zoned R2 single family low density to M2 multiple family high density.
Mr. Haas.
Move we adopt ordinance number 2020-113.
Second, Mr. Slough. Questions or comments? I have some comments. Mr. Seek made some points that the applicant was going to be enjoying benefits on his property not available to others in the district, and I don't believe that is the case. The applicant went through city planning and goes through city council for a rezone request. The project that he wants to build can be built on the property with room to spare. It will not be hugging the alley as said. It will be set back and meet the setbacks as required for the zoning area. It is in my opinion, it is of a good use for the property, and the applicant has been very forthcoming so far. They will still have to submit a site plan for the project, and work cooperatively. Seeing as though that the applicant is from Lipsick, or more accurately Miller City, it's not like this is an out-of-town developer, as was previously stated. Mr. Schneider is our neighbors, and I appreciate his desire to invest his time and talent and money in our city to make more housing options available in a city that has need for this type of housing. I will be in favor of this ordinance for those reasons. Other questions or comments? All those in favor of ordinance 2020-113, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
Nay.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2020-114, an ordinance vacating a certain portion of a certain alley hereinafter referred to as 811 Broad Avenue Vacation in the city of Findlay, Ohio.
Questions or comments? Those in favor of ordinance 2020-114, please say aye after your name is
You've got a
called.
motion?
Yeah, you know you're right. Mr. Palmer, are you in the
I think
motion?
we should make that motion.
I'm sorry. Mr. Palmer.
Move to approve ordinance number 2020-114.
Second, Mr. Slough. I apologize. Questions or comments? All those in favor of 2020-114, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2020-116, an emergency ordinance authorizing all actions necessary to support the continuation of a governmental electric aggregation program with opt-out provisions pursuant to section 4928.20 of the Ohio Revised Code, the aggregation program, directing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to execute an electric supply agreement with Energy Harbor and declaring an emergency.
In order so that we can have conversation on this, I would make a motion to adopt ordinance 2020-116.
Suspend.
Point of order. Needs a third reading before we can adopt.
I mean, you are the parliamentarian today.
Glad he's here.
I'm glad you're here, and I wonder where our law director is.
Skipping steps there, Russell.
President.
Do you want to change that to suspend?
I will make a motion that council's rules of order be suspended and ordinance 2020-116 be given its third reading. Second, Mrs.
Sorry. Never mind.
Second, Mr. Slough.
Yes.
All those in favor of suspending council's rules and giving this ordinance its third reading, please say aye after the name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
And Mr. Russell?
Aye. The council's rules have been suspended, and this ordinance will be given its third reading.
Ordinance 2020-116.
Mr. Hellman.
I guess I've got a question when you get finished going through your parliamentary stuff. The question is, why are we suspending the rules?
Because it needs a third reading tonight in order to be enacted. And we have to have a conversation amongst ourselves about 2020-116 or 2020-117. And the only way we can have that conversation is if we have an ordinance that has been motioned and approved for, we have a motion and a second on the table. And so the first thing we had to do was suspend, and now we're entertaining a motion for this to be approved so that we could then open into conversation.
I appreciate that explanation. I didn't realize it needed to be done tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Slough.
If Mr. Smelter is here, I would request that he have the ability to maybe give his guidance to council as to what his thoughts are on this.
You are more than welcome to ask questions of Mr. Schmelzer. We just can't discuss. Paul.
Good evening.
We've got two items before us,
Yes, sir.
and I am not as expert as you are. So I would request that you please give a summary
Explanation.
of
Okay.
which you think is better and why.
All right, well, I'll start with a little bit of background on the energy aggregation, and then if you still want my opinion afterwards, I can give you that.
Okay.
It's been for more than a decade now that the city has entered into aggregation programs for both electric and gas. This one is for electric. Each time it's up for renewal, we take our block of business, which is the city of Findlay, and we take it out to market. Any of the suppliers that's out there is eligible to give our consultant a bid, which is what they essentially do. They run an electronic bid process. Our consultant manages all that for us. Everything comes in real time, and then they can give us a summary document and a recommendation for which supplier to go with. Now, I'm not sure if you have it with you, but in the original packet for the legislation, there was a brief explanation in the form of a letter, and there were also two summary documents related to the pricing structure. This sort of goes to the second point as to why you have two ordinances. One ordinance is for Constellation. Constellation's best offer is a 3-year deal. The other ordinance is for Energy Harbor. And Energy Harbor was the only one to offer a 4-year deal. Now, if you're to take a look at the savings on average per resident, you multiply that by the average number of accounts, which I think is somewhere in the neighborhood of 13,000. You're able to do a little bit of math, and you can talk about how much the average resident saves versus current rate and versus a market rate. You're also able to take a look at what the community saves based on those two rates if you take those 13,000 accounts and multiply it by the length of the contract. So the 4-year deal at today's rates is the apparent better deal. That is Energy Harbor's offer. Length of term, lowest price per kilowatt hour, number of accounts, best deal. I did think, though, that it was prudent to let the mayor and council know that really you have a similar pricing structure in terms of kilowatt hours from Constellation. It's actually a little bit lower. And you also don't have any conversation about potential litigation from the state of Ohio relative to what was formerly First Energy because of the nuclear plants. Now, this is where you sort of get into opinion. My opinion is I have no idea how that's going to turn out. My opinion is that it is unlikely to have significant bearing on our plan. Again, that's my opinion only. But I felt like it was information that you folks should have to make your decision with. So, again, that's the differences, one of which you will obviously vote down, the other of which we would like to have passed tonight. The reason why we need it passed tonight is because these offers are good for 30 days. They run the market, they'll give you their numbers, and they'll say, we'll hold them for 30 days. It's actually a little bit over that, but I told them the soonest I would get this done is second reading. So you don't have to make a decision tonight. You can talk about this longer if you want, but it means we'll go back out to market and I'll have to bring you back new rate sheets.
Thank you, sir. If memory serves me correct, you recommended 116?
In my letter, I state that the lowest 3-year offer is Constellation. So if you are concerned about the litigation, that is your best bet. If you take a look at the math related to the two offers and the length of time, then Energy Harbor is your best bet. It is my opinion that the litigation with Energy Harbor is probably not going to affect us. But it's up to council too whether or not they want to to sign on to a contract with a company that's being litigated by the state of Ohio over the types of headlines that you've all read.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stelter.
Ms. Warren,
Hey, well,
Yes, sorry.
what, you're fine. Is there a big difference in the price?
It's very, very small in terms of kilowatt hours, but when you multiply it out by the length of the contract, there's probably
$40. I think it's approximately 40.
per resident, but what you really got to look at is the community savings. So, what I think is best to look at, well, they're both, I guess, equal to look at. I gotta put my glasses on here. So I just turned 50. All right, so going back to this sheet that was in the offer, if you look at the apples to apples comparison, which is supposedly what a resident can go out in the market and get by themselves, no aggregation. So this is supposed to show the value of aggregation relative to just market rate. Energy Harbor, over the 4-year deal, will save the community about $5.5 million. Constellations will save $4.05 million. Average savings per resident for Constellation is 103. Average savings annually per resident for Energy Harbor is 105. So you can see, you know, relatively speaking, if you're an average resident, you have very little impact in your decision.
And which is
Take all those accounts and aggregate them and add another year to that lower kilowatt per hour, and you can have some significant difference in terms of dollars that basically get to remain in the community because they're not going out to an energy supplier. The same spreadsheet format is set up when you take a look at current program rate. So if you have a resident that says, well, you know, what are you doing for me under the current aggregation plan relative to the rate that I'm paying now? The current program rate is an average savings of $39 for the 3-year deal and $41 for the 4-year deal. The difference between the two, when you take all those accounts and the length of the contract into account, is $1.5 million savings for Constellation and a $2.1 million savings. And that's really the kind of number that I focus on. So how many dollars get to stay in the community because it's not getting paid to a supplier? Apples to apples, you got millions of dollars in difference, $1.5 million in difference. Over the current program rate, about $600,000.
Can I ask you one more question?
Mhm.
Is the 5.5 just, well, not just because, but for 4 years versus the 4.0 is for 3 years?
Yes, ma'am.
So, I mean, if you just took that and in 4 years, if something gets extended or a new one later, that would still be like about 5.3? Or does it
You're
not work that
absolutely
way?
correct.
I'm not just
So
asking.
what you're talking about is speculation as to what the market's going to look like in year 4 if you sign a 3-year deal.
I was just,
Right?
just
Because-
asking.
Right. No,
But
you're
yeah, no,
right.
I know what you're saying too.
Yeah.
I was
If
just
it's-
making sure I was looking at that right.
You're looking at it exactly right.
That's all I wanted to know. I understand what you're saying.
Everybody clear on the decision? Any more questions? I can pass this around if you guys want it, if you don't have it. Yeah, a couple meetings. Yeah, last meeting.
so we have had the third reading for 2020-116. Entertain a motion to adopt. Mr. Slab.
I would move that we adopt ordinance number 2020-116.
Mr. Niemeyer, second. Discussion. I'd say that because we're passing this on an emergency basis and with 2 council representatives absent, it will require 8 votes in order to pass one of these things on the emergency. So we should have this discussion as to whether we think 116 or 117 is the better, and come to an understanding, because if we would then run through this and say do 7-1 on one of them, on the one that we would want, we would lose the rate because we couldn't have it signed for 45 days. Ms. Warnicki.
So, discussion, is anyone concerned about the lawsuit against First Energy? I mean, I guess that's kind of the issue.
Mr. Hellman.
Before we had the discussion, I guess I was in favor personally of avoiding the litigation issue and just going with the 3-year contract with Constellation. After Mr. Schmelzer's comments, he seems to be less concerned about it than I was, or him. So I don't know how I'm going to vote. I guess I would be in favor of avoiding the litigation. Make sure you lock in the prices. On a per household basis, the savings is not all that much, you know, to the individual person, individual household. So I don't know how others feel about it.
That's kind of my first thought. I mean, I don't know, you know, litigation just kind of, but
Avoid the risk.
I'm not familiar with it. It's just, you know, kind of like a black mark on that side, in my opinion.
I would say that I think both companies, I'm sure, are in litigation. It's obviously the specific types that First Energy is the issues of that they're being talked about, but I don't know that the litigation in question, or the litigation in question is going to affect this company's ability to deliver a contract. They wouldn't be putting 4-year contracts out there for a supply of energy if they couldn't satisfy it. And I don't know that us signing an aggregation agreement, I can't fathom how that would give us any liability into the issues that are going on in Columbus. And so, Denny, if that is your concern on the litigation, can you? I guess I just don't. I wouldn't share that concern. My only concern would be on their ability to continue to supply or to fulfill the rest of the contract.
Can you, Grant, could you repeat that? You said you didn't have a concern about them being able to supply the energy for the 4-year contract?
I personally don't believe that they'll have issue doing that.
But then at the end, you said
So that would be the only concern on the 4-year deal with Energy Harbor, which is the new name for the First Energy Supply Company. Would be their ability to perform the contract. I would have zero concern that us entering into an aggregation agreement with them somehow exposes us to a liability related to this scandal.
I wasn't concerned about us being implicated in the liability of that.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying.
Other questions, or I see the mayor's going to have a conversation amongst council to start. Other questions or comments? Mayor Martin.
And I'm certainly fine with that, Mr. Russell. I guess the reason that you have the 2 options in front of you, because typically we would just recommend the best bidder. I completely agree. I have no concerns with any liability, that there would be no liability assumed by us entering into a contract with Energy Harbor. Personally, I think it's more of a, for lack of a better term, a moral stand. The price differential is so minimal. I think there's still a benefit gained for our citizens and our community overall. And it's the fact of the matter that we don't want to be affiliated closely with a company that practices in the way that this organization has recently been represented in. Certainly, my preference, the reason that you have the 2 is because I felt it was important that we give you all the option and have this discussion. Personally, I would be more comfortable with Constellation. But again, it's up to you all, but I think that that is the better move. It's still a cost saving over our current contract. It's very minimal differential as was shown to you between the two contracts. Yes, it is a shorter term contract by a year, but overall I think it is the better decision for the city of Findlay to be entering into organizations that have the high moral standard that we do as a community.
Other questions or comments? Seeing as though there's none, all those in favor of ordinance 2020-116, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki? She told me to start with her.
Aye, whatever.
Mr. Greeno?
Nay.
Mr. Haas?
Nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Nay.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Nay.
Mr. Palmer?
Nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
And that's it. So we have 2 ayes, 3 ayes,
Yeah.
Some of them voted that we're gonna do first.
3 ayes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nays.
Yeah.
And ordinance 2020-116 does not pass.
Second reading for ordinance 2020-117, an emergency ordinance authorizing all actions necessary to support the continuation of a governmental electric aggregation program with opt-out provisions pursuant to section 4928.20 of the Ohio Revised Code, the aggregation program, directing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to execute an electric supply agreement with Constellation and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Palmer?
Move to suspend council statutory rules and give ordinance number 2020-117 its third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. We have a motion to suspend rules. All those in favor of suspending rules, please say aye after name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
And Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Council's rules have been suspended and this ordinance will be given its third reading.
Ordinance 2020-117.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of 2020-117.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Questions or comments? All those in favor of adopting 2020-117, please say aye after name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Ordinance 2020-117 is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2020-119, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2020-121, an ordinance establishing job classifications, pay ranges, salary schedules, and other matters that may affect pay for all non-elected officers and employees of the city of Findlay, Ohio, and repealing ordinance number 2019-86, and all other ordinances and or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith, and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2020-123, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
I make a motion that council's rules be suspended and ordinance 2020-123 be given its second and third reading. Second, Mr. Hellman. We have a motion to suspend rules. All those in favor of suspending rules, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
And Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Council's rules have been suspended and this ordinance will be given its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-123.
One more time.
Oh, ordinance 2020-123.
Now, Mr. Hellman.
I move that we pass ordinance 2020-123.
Second, Mr. Slough. Questions or comments? All in favor of adopting ordinance 2020-123 be given, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer? Aye. Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
And Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2020-124, an ordinance repealing the current zoning map included in the current zoning code, chapter 1101, et sec, of the codified ordinances of the city of Findlay, Ohio, and in its place adopting, approving, and incorporating a revised zoning map attached hereto as if fully rewritten herein.
Old business. New business.
We did have a quick piece of old business, if that's okay.
Please. Sorry, Jim, didn't see you.
No problem, and thank you. I'll make it quick. It's been a long meeting, I know, for you folks. I want to give you an update on the COVID situation with the CARES Act funding. We are now expecting, and has been transferred over to us, $1,485,500 plus and change. So at your next meeting on November 3rd, there's going to be an appropriation ordinance that will be passed at that meeting. That's very, very important. And also, you're going to see separately, based on the conversation I've had with Appropriations Chair Wobser as well as the mayor, that in working with Deputy Auditor Sampson, there's going to need to be a resolution, a separate resolution by council, a proclamation by the mayor in coordination with an updated legal opinion, which we'll talk to the law director about. I don't think Ginger's had a chance to yet. Those three documents have to be coordinated together. Doing that accomplishes the goal that the mayor put forth, and preliminary figures indicate that we will have enough funds to claim in excess, it looks like initially, as long as you include patrol with fire, in excess of $3 million. So the total you'll have available for COVID, all inclusive, between House Bill 481, House Bill 614, and the controlling board is $2.3 million. We have ample monies, not counting the monies that have already been applied towards the funds and encumbered for reimbursements of everything from masks and sanitizer and everything else. So we're in wonderful shape there. And then you'll have other options then, but we're going to treat this initial legislation and documentation that we need very strictly right down the line, just to solve the problem so that we're all in good shape with regard to those funds. And then and that leaves you another meeting should there be anything else that you want to do with those funds. And the mayor has suggested and is beginning to think about some things, and she may or may not be talking with your body about that. And the other thing I have, just real quick, as you all know, the performance audit for water and sewer and utility billing came out today. I wanted to give a quick kudos to former councilperson Holly Frishy, who really spearheaded that, to your former council in getting that passed, and all you folks who voted for that back then, as well as Ginger Sampson, who worked very, very hard to get the data coordinated, the data to the team that the state auditor put together, and of course your superintendent of water, sewer, and your supervisor of utility billing. They all worked as well, but Ginger deserves a super kudos for that as well. And I hope you enjoy that. I think the conclusions at the end of each of the sections, so the 5 conclusions, really summarize it well. So did anybody have any questions for me on any of those? If not, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
New business. Mayor.
Wonderful. I will try to be quick. Just a couple items that I've tried to keep you abreast of, but just want to reiterate here. As you saw, the Service Safety Director position has not yet been filled. Given the end of year requirements, I'm going to hold off on doing any additional interviews until early next year. As a reminder, Paul is committed to staying on as long as we need to make that transition. So there's not an immediate fire or deadline that we need to be meeting. So I want to make sure that we have the right person to serve our community in this important role. Just want to continue to reiterate, you have the financial summary report in your doc packet this week. Our departments are continuing to do a great job. We are managing and meeting those targets as well as exceeding it. So I think we are going to do a great job of coming in a good financial position with only spending so far about 80% of our expected expenses for this year. And I know our departments are doing a great job of preparing for next year's budget, which you will be seeing in the near future, and continuing to keep those belts tight to make sure we are being wise financial stewards. I just want to give a shout out because I think it's something always worth noting as we talk about the salary ordinances and 2020 budgeting. The wage salary calculation that we utilize is so unique within our community, and it provides so much transparency and understanding within our departments, and is able to provide a mechanism to help stabilize our salaries. And I think that that's something that is really important to continue to note, because it provides that transparency for our team members, and even in these times when things get tight, they know what to expect, they know it ahead of time, there's planning, there's no surprises, and I just think that that's worth noting. I know I sent out a document to the DORA ad hoc committee, so look forward to meeting with you all on that. As the auditor mentioned related to this CARES funding, I am speaking with Councilman Wobser, and we'll be getting documentation to all of you. As the auditor mentioned, our initial goal was to be able to put those funds towards wages, and what that allows us to do is to have those funds to offset them through wages, and then make sure that we're in a strong financial position going into next year. That also allows us, by using all of those funds, to be eligible some of the additional funds that are returned from other municipalities within our county to the county treasury. And so those funds will then be redistributed to the municipalities which have used all of their CARES funding. Similar to the way that the county worked with them and the Community Foundation earlier this year to put $500,000 towards housing, we are looking at how we may be able to, directly from the city, be able to provide some support to nonprofits and maybe similarly to businesses. Again, making sure that these funds are being put into the community to provide benefit and help support those who may be struggling through these times, and continuing to provide especially those essential services, and making sure that folks are obviously having food, clothes, all those different items that are so important, but our nonprofits that do so much good work in our community are feeling that support, given that many of our other businesses have received direct support. So more to come on that, but we are doing a lot to make sure we're putting those dollars to good use, not only within the City of Findlay operations, but within the community. As the auditor mentioned, related to the performance audit, forwarded that out to everyone. There'll also be a press release going out just hitting on some of the high notes. It is great to know that we do good work every day. Even better to have somebody else tell you you do good work. The only downside is that we paid for it. But it was great to see that the findings of the report made two recommendations that are items that we're always continuing to improve upon related to capital planning and financial standards, as well as capital improvements. One item, though, that I think is very important to note is the noteworthy accomplishment that we received from the Auditor of State. The auditor mentioned it briefly, the state auditor group briefly mentioned it, that they do not give accommodations out lightly. And so receiving this noteworthy accomplishment is something to really be proud of. And the noteworthy accomplishment, which you will see, is that our water and sewer operations does 22% more water per FTE at 18% less of a cost per million gallons than any other of our peer groups. So we are far exceeding within operations. Yeah, that is definitely worth celebrating. They do fantastic work. And as you look at the graphs that they included in there, we are additionally hundreds of dollars below our competitors and what those expenses are for water and wastewater among our peers, as well as the Ohio average. So we are providing a great level of service and keeping this utility low. And it's something that we take great pride in, and I know that they do great work. So that's something that I think is important in recognizing, because we do that great work every day. It's so easy to pass it by, but it's something really worth recognizing. So that is all. Does anybody have any questions?
Mayor,
Yes.
I have a question. I just wanted to compliment you, I guess, on the fact that the city and the administration were able to keep the expenses down. And this graph that you put together is a perfect example of that, and it makes it a lot easier to understand. And thank you.
Well, you know, you always have to tell information multiple different formats because people digest it differently. So glad we can provide it in that manner, but really I can take very little credit. All I continue to do is remind our departments to do their job, and they continue to deliver. So I'm very proud of them.
We are too. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to make note that on Monday, the Findlay Kiwanis and the Hancock Historical Museum held a ribbon cutting event for the Brook Locker Playground on the grounds of the Little Red Schoolhouse. This was a project that celebrated the 100th anniversary of Kiwanis in Findlay, and the planning for this started a couple of years ago. And when the Kiwanis, which I am a member of Kiwanis, decided they wanted to do something big, then it was a question of where, and the grounds of the Little Red Schoolhouse just became the targeted place. And so then we approached the Historical Museum, and a partnership was formed. The park is named for Jim Brooklocker, who was both a Kiwanian and a founder of the Historical Museum, and he was a lifelong member of Kiwanis and a very impactful person. And I can tell you that the one person who wouldn't want it named Brooklocker Park would be Jim Brooklocker, but it is very appropriate because he gave his heart and soul to the Findlay community. And when this park was constructed, it was constructed during 2020, during the year of COVID, and Sarah Sisser, the head of the Historical Museum, actually made comment about this on Monday. The fact that when most places don't get volunteers and it's such a crazy year, the Kiwanis pulled off building a playground, and it was the efforts especially of a handful of people. Rick Kidwell from the Kiwanis deserves a special shout out, as does Irv Reinhardt, Charles Construction, and Dan Stone from Van Horn Hoover, all chipped in and contributed to this effort along with many Kiwanians. And the city gets a lot of credit too. Rick Kidwell was our spearhead at the project, and he worked with city folks, especially the folks rebuilding the county, the road right outside the Little Red Schoolhouse, and told me multiple times how wonderful it was to work with folks in the city and how cooperative they were in all the haywire things that goes on when construction happens. So the park, the playground is open. Mr. Garino, they have a slide just waiting for you or your grandchildren.
All right.
And but it's a treasure for the community to enjoy, and I tip my hat to my fellow Kiwanians, to the Historical Museum, and all of the community that made it happen. Any other new business? Hearing as though there is none, we are adjourned. Oh, motion to adjourn. Mr. Paul, will you speak too?
Yes, motion to adjourn.
Second, Mr. Hassel, in favor of adjourning. We are adjourned.
You're not used to having to do that. I was gonna make a quip about how nobody knew how to make a motion since